It was 2:14 a.m. when the chilling 911 call came in. A man's voice, frantic, breathless, cried into the receiver. "My wife. She's not breathing. Please, you have to come now." The dispatcher immediately began guiding him through CPR instructions, but something was off. Not in what he said, but in when he said it. You see, before police even reached the address, an unsettling detail began to emerge. The time of the call didn't match the timeline of events. Tonight, we unravel a case where every minute mattered, and one man's own voice would betray him. Ethan and Rachel Whitmore were, to most of their neighbors, the perfect suburban couple. They had a beautiful two-story home in Milford, a Labrador named Benny, and a marriage that looked solid from the outside. But as friends would later reveal, the cracks were already there. Arguments over money, jealousy, and Rachel's recent talk of divorce. On the night of September 14th, Ethan said he'd gone to bed early. Rachel, he claimed, stayed downstairs to watch a movie. Hours later, he says he woke up to find her collapsed on the kitchen floor. Here's where investigators started raising eyebrows. The coroner would later confirm that Rachel had been dead for at least an hour before Ethan's call to emergency services. But how could Ethan have just found her if her body was already cold? The exact timestamp of that 911 call, 2:14 a.m., became the anchor point of the entire investigation. And it's here, in this moment, that we first see the seed of suspicion grow. What would you think if the very first thing you learned in a murder investigation was that the call for help came far too late? Or, perhaps, far too early? Stay with me, because by the end of this series, you'll know exactly why Ethan dialed those 3 numbers before he was supposed to. Behind closed doors, perfection often hides a different truth. Rachel was 34, a bright, charismatic marketing executive. Ethan, 38, worked as a home contractor. He built houses for a living, and yet, the one he lived in was about to collapse in more ways than one. Friends told police Rachel had recently started reconnecting with an old college friend, a man named Mark Dawson. It wasn't confirmed to be romantic, but Ethan didn't take it well. Rachel's sister, Allison, revealed that just weeks before her death, Rachel had confided, "I don't think this marriage can be fixed." Ethan's temper, it's getting worse. There were no official police reports of domestic violence, no visible bruises, but there were text messages, dozens of them, showing arguments that escalated late into the night. On September 13th, the night before her death, Rachel attended a work function. She got home around 10:15 p.m. Neighbors heard nothing unusual. But one neighbor, Mrs. Keegan, said she did notice Ethan pacing on the front porch around midnight, smoking. The next time anyone saw Rachel, she was lying lifeless in her kitchen. Investigators, at this point, had only one certainty: the marriage was strained. And strained marriages often appear in murder case files. But suspicion is one thing. Proof is another. When first responders arrived at the Whitmore residence, Ethan was kneeling by Rachel, hands shaking, insisting he'd tried CPR. But Detective Hannah Rhodes noticed something immediately. Rachel's body wasn't positioned like someone who'd just collapsed. She was lying perfectly straight, arms at her side, more like someone who had been placed there. An autopsy revealed bruising around Rachel's neck, faint, but unmistakable. Cause of death, manual strangulation. Estimated time of death, between 1 o'clock and 1:15 a.m. That meant she had been dead for roughly an hour before Ethan made the call. If Ethan really woke up at 2:10 a.m., as he claimed, and found Rachel on the floor, the science didn't match. Her body temperature suggested she'd been gone long before he ever picked up the phone. If Ethan didn't call when he found her, then why did he call when he did? And more importantly, what was he doing during that missing hour? Sitting in the interview room, Ethan repeated his story. "I went to bed early. Rachel stayed downstairs. I woke up thirsty around 2, came down, and she was just there. I panicked." But detectives didn't miss his next slip. He said he found her sprawled on the floor. Yet officers' bodycam footage showed her lying neatly, legs straight, arms aligned. Small details began stacking against him. His watch, seized as evidence, showed he was awake and moving around at 1:20 a.m., according to its step tracker. Ethan claimed he never left bed until after 2 o'clock. The dispatcher's log showed Ethan gave CPR instructions minimal effort. His voice was rushed, almost eager to finish the call. Every version of the truth he gave seemed rehearsed. And soon, investigators would discover just how rehearsed it really was. Neighbors were the silent witnesses Ethan didn't know he had. One man, across the street, Told police he heard muffled shouting around 12:45 a.m., a man's voice and a woman's, overlapping. Mrs. Keegan, the same neighbor who saw Ethan smoking, swore she saw the kitchen light flicker on around 1:05 a.m., then off again minutes later. A camera from 3 houses down caught a faint figure moving in the Whitmore's driveway around 1:10 a.m. The figure seemed to be carrying something. Detectives began piecing together that Rachel likely died around that time, and Ethan's call at 2:14 wasn't panic. It was strategy. When police seized Ethan's phone, the search history sent shivers through the investigative team. At 12:58 a.m., a search. How long before a body gets cold? At 1:12 a.m., another. Signs someone is dead without touching them. And at 1:45 a.m., perhaps most damning of all, how soon can police tell time of death? Imagine this. Your spouse dies in the middle of the night, and instead of calling for help immediately, you Google forensic timelines. To detectives, these searches screamed consciousness of guilt. Ethan was trying to time something, maybe even convince himself of how much time he had before calling. Rachel's sister, Allison, revealed something crucial. Rachel had been planning to change her life insurance policy, removing Ethan as the primary beneficiary. She hadn't gotten around to signing the paperwork yet. The policy, worth $500,000, was still in Ethan's name at the time of her death. But motive alone wouldn't convict Ethan. They needed the one thing he didn't realize he'd already given them, proof from his own mouth. Most people don't know that when you call 911, the line records from the moment the call connects, sometimes even a fraction of a second before the dispatcher speaks. On Ethan's call, there was a moment, a whisper, that didn't fit. Just before his voice panicked, there's a muffled mutter, "Okay, now." It sounded like he was telling himself to start. This 1-second whisper changed the tone of the entire case. It was no longer just about mismatched timelines. It was about premeditation. Digital forensics revealed Ethan's phone had been unlocked at 1:09 a.m., right when Rachel was believed to have died, and remained active until 1:53 a.m., when it went dark for 20 minutes. That dark period? Investigators believe that's when Ethan staged the scene. Strangely, Rachel's hands were colder than expected for her core body temperature. The coroner suggested they may have been placed in contact with something cold, like a refrigerator door. Why? Possibly to mislead investigators about the time of death. Detectives called Ethan back for a follow-up interview. It was a strategy. They already had enough to confront him but wanted to see if he'd change his story. And he did. This time, Ethan claimed he might have gone downstairs earlier, maybe around 1:30, but he insisted Rachel was alive then. When confronted with the phone search history, Ethan went silent. When asked about the whisper on the 911 tape, he leaned back and muttered, "You think I killed her, don't you?" The whisper on the 911 call wasn't just suspicious, it was damning. Police sent the recording to an audio forensic lab, where experts filtered background noise and amplified the sound. Clear as day, the words came through. "Okay, now." To detectives, this was Ethan cueing himself to begin his performance for dispatch, the moment he'd decided it was time to make the call. This was more than panic. It was control. Ethan wasn't reacting to Rachel's death. He was orchestrating the response. Why would a grieving husband need to time his own grief? Rachel's best friend, Jenna, sat with police for over 2 hours, detailing months of tension. One text Rachel sent to Jenna read, "If anything ever happens to me, it won't be an accident." Jenna explained Rachel had been quietly moving money into a separate account, something Ethan discovered 2 weeks before her death. Neighbors recalled hearing a loud, heated argument. Words like leave and done echoed into the street. The next morning, Ethan was unusually friendly, chatting with neighbors he rarely spoke to. To police, this shift looked like someone overcompensating, already managing appearances. It might sound strange, but the family's Labrador, Benny, became an unintentional witness. Detectives noted that during the 911 call, Benny was completely silent in the background. Neighbors said the dog always barked when strangers entered, or when Ethan yelled. The silence suggested Benny had been locked away somewhere during the incident, further evidence of staging. It proved Ethan had taken steps to control not just the crime scene, but the sounds around it. Ethan volunteered to take a polygraph, confident he could pass. The questions were straightforward. Did you kill your wife? No. Did you delay calling 911? No. Did you stage the scene? No. The results? He failed every critical question. While polygraphs aren't admissible in court, detectives used the failure as leverage during questioning. Polygraphs can't convict you, but they can corner you. By now, the district attorney had a clear theory. Ethan strangled Rachel during an argument, then waited over an hour to call 911 in an attempt to confuse the time of death. They believed his motive was twofold: anger over Rachel's plans to leave and financial gain from her life insurance. 1. Time of death mismatch. 2. Suspicious Google searches. 3. Whisper on the 911 call. 4. Neighbor's testimony of earlier activity. 5. Financial motive. Ethan's lawyer painted a different picture. Rachel had been under stress from work. She may have collapsed naturally. Ethan's delay in calling was simply shock. They claimed the Google searches were him trying to understand what was happening. The bruising on Rachel's neck was too specific. The coroner testified it was consistent with homicidal strangulation, not a medical episode. When the case went to trial, the jury pool was intensely questioned about their views on circumstantial evidence. The prosecution's case relied heavily on it: no eyewitnesses, no confession. But as the DA reminded them in opening statements, murder rarely happens in front of an audience. You must see the truth in the shadows between the facts. The first days of testimony laid out the cold, clinical evidence. Jurors heard the 911 call, and that haunting whisper, for the first time. Several jurors visibly shifted in their seats. One later told reporters it was the moment she stopped believing in coincidence. When you hear someone's guilt in their own voice, you don't forget it. Ethan took the stand in his own defense, a risky move. He cried, describing Rachel as his whole world. He claimed the whisper was him praying under his breath. But under cross-examination, when asked why his search history showed he was awake during the time experts believed Rachel died, he froze. Prosecutors later said Ethan's pause was the loudest moment in the room. The prosecution's final words were simple: "Ladies and gentlemen, time does not lie." He called 911 before it made sense to, because he had already ensured there was nothing anyone could do. The defense pleaded for reasonable doubt, but the weight of the circumstantial chain was crushing. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours, lightning speed for a murder case with no direct eyewitness. Their decision was unanimous: guilty of second-degree murder. When the verdict was read, Ethan's shoulders slumped. He didn't look at the jury, the judge, or even his own lawyer. But the most chilling detail: Rachel's sister Allison swore she saw him smirk, just for a split second, before regaining his composure. Sometimes, guilt isn't in the verdict, it's in the expression. At sentencing, the prosecution pushed for the maximum penalty, 40 years in prison. Allison read a victim impact statement that left the courtroom silent. "She was my sister, my best friend, and the last voice she heard was yours, not to comfort her, but to silence her forever." The judge gave Ethan 38 years, citing the deliberate delay in calling for help as particularly cruel. In post-trial interviews, jurors revealed the key factor that swayed them wasn't just the whisper or the bruising, it was the math. The coroner's findings, the phone data, the search history, and the neighbor testimonies all lined up to show Ethan had an entire hour where he could have called for help, and didn't. That gap was too big to ignore. Prosecutors believe that in that missing hour, Ethan strangled Rachel during an argument. He locked the dog away to keep the scene quiet. He searched online about body cooling and time of death determination. He staged Rachel's body on the kitchen floor to look like she'd collapsed naturally. He rehearsed his 911 call before finally dialing. He didn't just kill her, he scripted the aftermath. Ethan's defense filed an appeal, claiming the prosecution misinterpreted the timeline and that the whisper was unfairly prejudicial. The appellate court denied the request without even granting oral arguments. For Rachel's family, it was a final confirmation that justice had been served. Criminal psychologists reviewing the case noted Ethan's behavior fit a pattern known as delayed emergency call syndrome, where killers wait before calling for help to manipulate forensic evidence. It's rare, but when it appears, it's almost always premeditated. Rachel's parents sold their home and moved out of state. Allison became an advocate for domestic violence awareness, using her sister's story to warn others about the signs she wished she'd recognized sooner. She often tells people, if you're with someone who scares you, that's already enough reason to leave. In a prison interview 2 years later, Ethan still insisted he was innocent. "I froze. That's all. I didn't time anything. They twisted it all." When asked about the whisper, he laughed. People hear what they want to hear. But when the interviewer asked him what Rachel's last words were, he went silent. And stayed silent. Cases like Ethan's prove one thing. In murder investigations, Time isn't just a detail, it's a witness. Every minute Ethan delayed calling 911 became a piece of the puzzle, and eventually, the chain that bound him to his crime. The truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it ticks. And so, the story of Ethan Whitmore ends, not with a mystery, but with a warning. If you ever find yourself in danger, or suspect someone you love is in trouble, call for help immediately. Don't wait. Don't wonder. Because sometimes, the time you take can cost a life. If this story shook you, share it. Someone you know might be in a dangerous situation right now and not even realize it. And for more real stories like this, cases where the smallest details changed everything, make sure you subscribe to True Crime Hub. Hit that bell, because the next case might just be the one you can't stop thinking about.